Hello, and welcome to this lesson on soundproofing and building your home recording studio and trying to decide when you're looking for a new home. So you're on the housing search and you know you want to build a home recording studio in it. What do you need to look for and what do you need to think about? That's what this video and this lesson is going to be all about. Before we jump in, I have a free resource for you. This is my free soundproofing workshop. It's 45 minutes of in-depth teaching explaining exactly how and what you need to do when you're thinking about building a soundproof room, soundproof home recording studio. All of that will be in the workshop. To check it out, just go to soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. That is soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. All right, let's jump into this lesson on what you need to look for when you're house shopping for a house for your home recording studio. So first question is, you need to ask yourself, am I going to be building this from the ground up, let's say in the backyard, or am I going to be building it in an existing structure inside the house, or maybe in an existing barn or shed on the property? That's the first question. So let's go over the pros and cons of if you were going to build it from the ground up, let's say in the backyard. So the first pro is there's no limitation. You literally have a blank canvas where you can build whatever you want, based on your budget. So you can design the perfect room ratio. You can make sure that you have the exact dimensions you want for how you're going to use the space. And you can design in the perfect HVAC system, electrical system, and you can even get in a bathroom, or you can design in the mechanical room so you have ideal heating and cooling. There's so many benefits to building from the ground up. You can also get a higher ceiling or more room volume, leading to better acoustics in the long run. Smaller rooms tend to sound worse, so when you build from scratch, you can get your studio to be that perfect room ratio and room height. Some of the cons are, first, it's just going to cost more. Building from scratch is definitely going to cost more than building in an existing structure. So you have to factor in a higher cost. It's going to take longer to build. My studio took me a year to build. I was moving very slow, 1 to 2 days a week. So you have to factor in the idea that it could take a very long time to build it since it's more work. It eats up your backyard space. So if you don't have a big backyard to begin with, you put in the structure and suddenly you don't have a backyard anymore. So you're going to need to look for land that has enough space. You may need a permit, which this is a big one. If you are looking at building at all outside of your existing house, or honestly, if you're doing an addition, you're going to need to get a permit pulled regardless. So you want to look into your local code laws before you buy the house to know what you're up against. This could even mean giving them a call, shooting them an email, reading their website. I highly recommend doing that. I didn't in my home search, and I wish I had learned a lot more about detached units in the code literature, so I knew exactly what I was up against when I was building. A second con is that you're definitely going to have to build a concrete slab. So you're going to have to pour a concrete slab, and that means that you're just going to have to spend that extra money to do it. You have to have space for the concrete truck to get back there. So that is definitely a con of building a new structure. One thing you may not have thought of that is a drawback is because you have a blank canvas, you have unlimited possibilities. And for someone who's never built a studio before, this can be extremely overwhelming. What if you do something wrong? You had the perfect template. Why did you mess it up? There's all these thoughts in your head that could go on that could hold you into, decision paralysis, where you don't actually ever finish the design. You never actually do it because you're just too afraid of the endless possibilities. Now let's go over the pros and cons of an existing structure. So right off the bat, one of the pros is going to be it's going to be cheaper than building from scratch, and it's going to take less time. So both of those are directly countering the building in a new structure. Like I said before, you have limitations, so that actually leads to more focus. You can see how you could actually finish this project because you can see the space that you're building in. You might be closer to things like the bathroom and the kitchen, which could be a pro because you don't have to go outside a building, walk to your house to use the bathroom, or get a bite to eat. You may not have to pull permits, which could be really helpful. I mean, if it's just a small build inside an existing room in the house, a lot of cities don't make you pull permits for that. And lastly, it could just generally be an easier DIY project than if you were going to build a building from scratch, where you might need to hire a contractor and multiple different craftsmen to design and build that building. Some of the cons with an existing structure. You really need to build on a concrete slab trying to build on a second story floor or a wood plank deck flooring in most homes is not advisable. And I'll talk about that later in the video. If you're building in a garage, you're going to lose garage space. So you're going to lose your garage. And that means you can't park your car in there and you can't store things in there. There are numerous constraints that you'll run up against if you're building in an existing structure, like existing pipes, ductwork, HVAC systems, electrical, existing beams, or structural walls that you cannot move. Ceiling height is probably going to be a problem if you're building an existing structure, so you're going to lose space because of the isolation. So all of those are cons that you're going to run up against with building inside an existing home. They're also just generally harder to isolate because you're building in a room that's connected to the rest of the house, so you have to decouple everything to make your isolation work. And lastly, a lot of times there's just too many doors and windows in the room that you're trying to build in. So building in an existing room, always look for something that has less windows, less doors, because each window and each door costs thousands of dollars to isolate. So if you've decided you're definitely going to build in, let's say, the backyard of your house, the first thing you want to look for is, like I said before, the codes. Make sure that you understand the codes before you buy the house. Specifically, look at the codes for bathrooms. A lot of times in detached dwelling units, I think a lot of cities call them DADUs for short, they may have a law where you can't have a living space like a kitchen or a bathroom in a detached unit, which a lot of studios want to have. Definitely look at grading and drainage. I built my studio on a hill and I've had some drainage issues and grading issues. So if you can find a flat, nice backyard, it'll always make life easier. Make sure you can trench the electrical. You're going to probably have to dig a trench underground to properly do electrical. And so you want to make sure that you can do that without any barriers from your main line. Lastly, make sure that you can get a concrete truck back there to pour the concrete slab. If you're in a space where you can't get any sort of materials or trucks behind your house, it's probably not a good site for your home recording studio. Before we move on to the next part of this lesson, I want to say that prefabricated sheds are not recommended. I did a build with my contractor Henry here in Nashville with a prefabricated shed, and it led to numerous problems and constraints throughout the build, leading to higher and higher costs and more time devoted to the build. So building from scratch, just plain old grass or dirt in your backyard, is always going to be better than buying one of those attractive looking prefabricated sheds that they just deliver right to your house. But again, they're flimsy, they're weak, and they're not desirable for home recording studios. All right, let's say that you decide you want to build inside an existing structure in the home or an existing structure outside of the home. I'm going to go over the pros and cons and what to look for in this situation. So the first thing I'll say is that you really should not build a home recording studio that's going to need isolation on an existing wood plank deck. Now, this means in traditional home construction, we don't usually build on concrete slabs. A lot of times they'll build a foundation, they'll run joists, and they'll lay plywood on top of the joists, and that is considered your wood deck. This would be on a first story floor and definitely on a second story floor in a home. And I do not recommend doing this. The main reason is that there's not enough mass, enough weight to properly soundproof a wood deck. To do this, you need to float a floor that has enough mass. This could be a concrete slab that's floated, or it could be layers and layers of plywood, drywall, mass-loaded vinyl, you name it, different layers of things that you then float on top of that wood deck to essentially soundproof the floor. Now, adding all that mass to an existing floor or existing wood deck means that you're going to have to talk to a structural engineer before you even begin doing this. So you're going to have to pay for the structural engineer, and then if the structural engineer says that your wood deck cannot support the added mass of the floating floor, you're then going to have to pay for a team to come in and add supports underneath that floor to hold the added weight. Then you're going to need to spend probably $2,000 to $4,000 at least floating a proper soundproof floor that will isolate your home recording studio. For all those reasons, I highly recommend building on a concrete slab, either in a basement or in an existing garage, or perhaps an existing barn or shed in the backyard. So now let's go over some of the benefits to building in a basement, if that is the choice you're going to go through. And then I'll go over some of the benefits and cons of building in a garage. So one of the biggest pros is that you're building in a basement is going to be most likely already partially or fully underground, meaning you're going to have concrete walls on all four sides and you'll have dirt behind them. So that's a great start for isolation on your walls. Another benefit is that you don't have to take up garage space. So if you build in a basement, you still get to keep your 1, 2, or 3 car garage for your storing your car and storing other items. A lot of times basements are unfinished, so this means that you have a great starting point from which to build your soundproof home recording studio. Basements tend to be bigger, so if you have a large space, it creates more volume, which can lead to better acoustics and enough room for soundproofing your walls and your ceiling. Some of the cons to building in a basement are you may have limited ceiling height. Most basements are not super tall, so ideally you want to have at least 8-foot tall ceilings to the joist, and 9 or 10 feet is even better. You're going to run into pipes, ductwork, and beams in your basement, so all of those require careful planning in the design phase so that you know how you're going to isolate around all those things. You're most likely going to have to beef up your ceiling in an existing basement because most of the noise is going to be coming from the floor above. So that means adding usually more layers of drywall than you would on your walls. Lastly, in a basement, because it's part of your home, there may be limitations to how you run the HVAC system. You might have to have a new HVAC system installed, and you may have trouble with getting proper electrical for a home recording studio in an existing home. Now, let's look at garages, which are another great option for most home recording studios. The pros for building in a garage are first that a lot of times it's either detached from the house fully, which is great, or even though it's connected to the house, a lot of it is not part of the house. So a basement is connected to the whole house, whereas a garage can be on the side and sound won't transfer as easily through the rest of the house. Another benefit to garages are having a higher ceiling, because you may not have a second floor above the garage, in which case you can definitely build a taller ceiling than in a basement. Garages can also be large. They can be a 2 to 3 car garage, which will give you plenty of space to build your home recording studio. A lot of time, garages are unfinished, so you can go ahead and start with a blank canvas and not have to do any demoing of a finished space. And lastly, a lot of times garages do not have a lot of doors and windows, which means that you can keep the cost down by just focusing on the walls and the ceiling. The cons to building in a garage. So first off, you lose your garage. A lot of people love having a garage in their house, so losing your garage means you can't store things in there and you can't park your car there. Another big one, the garage door. As you're imagining, the garage door is a weak point and it's also in the way. So when I build studios in garages, I always tell people you can leave the garage door, but we're going to build a new wall in front of it and we got to cut out the rails and the railings for the garage door, or you have to remove the garage door completely and we refinish the front of the house. If you do this, this can lead to a decrease in the home value because you no longer have a garage. So that's another con. Some garages are built cheaply and they may have thin walls, and the exterior support walls and ceiling and roof may be too thin to provide adequate sound isolation. So that means you have to beef up more on the inside. The ceiling height could be low in a garage. It's not guaranteed, especially if you have a second story above your garage. And lastly, if you do have a room above the garage, you're going to have to, again, think about the added isolation of your ceiling. So in conclusion, there is a lot to think about when you are shopping for a house and looking to build a home recording studio. I hope these pros and cons lists have opened your eyes to a lot of possibilities maybe you haven't already thought of, and helped you decide, one, if you're going to build a new structure or in an existing structure, and two, when you're looking for a home, what to look for in the basement or the garage, or at least having a concrete slab to start with. All right, if you are going down this long journey of building a soundproof home recording studio, I highly recommend checking out my free soundproofing workshop at soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. That is soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. I look forward to seeing you all next week with more information on soundproofing and room acoustics.